Hi, I'm Alexandra Martinez. My father looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're dead weight, Alex. This company doesn't have room for charity cases." My mother nodded in agreement and added, "Michael earned his place. You never did." They stripped my access cards, cleared out my desk, and escorted me from the building like I was some kind of corporate spy. But what they didn't know was that I had been quietly building something they couldn't see, something that would make their little empire crumble without me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Phoenix heat was suffocating that Tuesday morning in March, when everything fell apart. I had driven to Anderson Construction and Development, like I had every day for the past 3 years, parking in the same spot under the mesquite tree that provided the only decent shade in the employee lot. The building rose from the desert landscape like a monument to my family's success, all glass and steel reflecting the Camelback Mountains in the distance. I had grown up seeing that building as my future, my inheritance, my birthright. That morning, it would become my exile. I was 25 then, fresh out of Arizona State with a business degree that my parents had reluctantly funded, though they never let me forget the cost. While my older brother Michael had been groomed for leadership since high school, taking on real projects and meeting with clients, I had been relegated to what they called learning the basics. 3 years of filing, coffee runs, and data entry. 3 years of being told I needed to prove myself while watching Michael get promoted to vice president of operations without ever having to prove anything at all. The irony wasn't lost on me that the company was built on my grandmother's land, inherited through my mother's side of the family. Abuela Carmen had been a formidable woman who believed in hard work and family loyalty, but she had passed when I was 16, long before she could see how those values would be twisted by her daughter and son-in-law. I walked through the lobby that morning carrying my usual iced coffee from Desert Bloom Cafe and a stack of client satisfaction surveys I had been compiling for weeks. The surveys were my own initiative, something I had started because I noticed patterns in client complaints that nobody else seemed to be tracking. Small things like delayed responses to inquiries, miscommunication about project timelines, and a general feeling that Anderson Construction had grown too big to care about individual clients. The receptionist, Maria, gave me her usual warm smile. She was one of the few people in the building who treated me like I actually worked there, rather than like I was visiting on a temporary pass. "Morning, Alex. Your dad wants to see you in the conference room. He's got Michael and your mom in there, too." Family meetings were never good news. They usually meant I was about to be assigned some new menial task or lectured about my lack of initiative. I had learned to nod, smile, and wait for it to be over. But something felt different about Maria's tone, a careful neutrality that made my stomach clench. The conference room occupied the northeast corner of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the valley. My father, Robert Anderson, sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, wearing his usual navy suit and perpetual expression of mild disappointment. My mother, Linda, sat to his right, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. Michael lounged in a chair across from them, looking like he already knew exactly what was coming. "Close the door, Alex," my father said without looking up from the papers scattered in front of him. "We need to talk." I set my coffee down and took the seat closest to the door, a habit I had developed over years of family meetings that made me want to escape. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the table that seemed to divide the room into territories. "We've been doing some evaluating," my mother began, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she was about to deliver what she considered constructive criticism. "Looking at productivity, contributions, return on investment." My father leaned back in his chair, finally making eye contact. 3 years, Alex. 3 years you've been on the payroll, and we're having trouble identifying exactly what value you've brought to this organization." The words hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral. I had learned early that showing emotion in these situations only made things worse. I've been handling client communications, managing the filing systems, coordinating between departments. Michael laughed, actually laughed. Come on, Alex, filing and answering phones. That's not exactly executive material. I have also been working on client retention analysis, I said, gesturing toward the surveys I had brought. I've identified several areas where we're losing business due to communication gaps. My father glanced at the papers dismissively. Busy? Work. Anyone can compile surveys. The unfairness of it stole my breath. I had spent weeks calling former clients, analyzing feedback, identifying patterns that could save the company thousands in lost contracts. But in their eyes, it was just busy work because I was the one doing it. Here's the situation, my mother continued, her voice taking on the practiced cadence of a rehearsed speech. Michael has shown real leadership potential. He's been instrumental in landing the Scottsdale Commons project, and his vision for expanding our commercial portfolio has impressed our board of directors. I looked at Michael, who was trying not to smirk. The Scottsdale Commons project had been in development for over a year, with most of the groundwork laid by our senior project manager, Dave Chen. Michael had swooped in during the final negotiations, and somehow gotten credit for the entire deal. We've decided to restructure, my father announced. Michael will be taking on expanded responsibilities as senior vice president. He'll be overseeing all major projects and client relationships. There was a pause, the kind that feels pregnant with unspoken possibilities. For a moment, I thought they were building up to offering me a real position, maybe finally recognizing that I had been underutilized. Instead, my mother delivered the killing blow. We won't be needing your services anymore, Alex. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire you can't quite locate. I stared at her, waiting for clarification, for some indication that I had misunderstood. You're letting me go? I finally managed. We're being honest about what this company needs, my father said, his tone matter of fact. And what it needs is efficiency, accountability, results. You're a smart girl, Alex. You'll figure something out. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. After 3 years of being told I needed to work harder, prove myself, earn my place, they were discarding me like I was a failed experiment. And they were doing it in front of Michael, who was watching the whole thing with barely concealed satisfaction. What about the client analysis project? I asked, grasping for something, anything that might demonstrate my value. We'll have someone else look into it, my mother said with a wave of her hand, if it's worth pursuing. Michael leaned forward, his expression mockingly sympathetic. Look, sis, maybe this is for the best. You never really seemed happy here anyway. Now you can find something that's more your speed. The condescension in his voice was the final straw. I stood up, my chair scraping against the polished floor. More my speed? You mean something that doesn't require actual business knowledge or client relationships? Alex, my mother warned, there's no need to be dramatic. Dramatic? I looked around the room at the 3 people who were supposed to be my family, my support system, my partners in building something meaningful. You're firing your own daughter and calling her dramatic for having feelings about it? My father's expression hardened. You're fired because you're not contributing, Alex. This isn't a charity, it's a business. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. A business that wouldn't exist without Abuela Carmen's land. I shot back, immediately regretting the words, but unable to stop them. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. My mother's face went white, then red. Don't you dare bring your grandmother into this. She would be ashamed of the entitled attitude you're displaying right now. That hit deeper than anything else they had said. Abuela Carmen had been my champion, The one person in the family who believed I could do anything I set my mind to. She had died believing I would carry on her legacy of hard work and determination. To have my mother weaponize her memory against me felt like a desecration. She would be ashamed, I said quietly. But not of me. My father stood up, his face flushed with anger. That's enough. Security will escort you out. Your personal items will be boxed and sent to your address. You're having me escorted out by security? The humiliation was complete. Not only was I being fired, I was being treated like a criminal. It's standard procedure, Michael said, though his tone suggested he was enjoying every minute of this. I looked at each of them one more time, trying to find some trace of the family I thought I knew. My father, whose bedtime stories had filled my childhood with dreams of building something meaningful together. My mother, who had taught me to drive in the company parking lot on weekends. Michael, who used to sneak into my room during thunderstorms when we were kids. They stared back at me like strangers. Fine, I said, gathering what dignity I had left. But understand this. You're not just firing an employee. You're disowning your daughter. And that's a choice you'll have to live with. I walked toward the door, but my father's voice stopped me. Alex. I turned, hoping for some last-minute reprieve, some indication that this was all a test or a misunderstanding. Instead, he said, "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You're young. You'll bounce back." The casual dismissal was somehow worse than the anger. I was a minor inconvenience in their business plan, easily removed and quickly forgotten. The security guard was waiting in the hallway, a kind-faced man named Carlos, who had always been friendly during my years in the building. He looked embarrassed as he fell into step beside me. "I'm sorry about this, Miss Anderson," he said quietly as we walked toward the elevator. "It's Martinez now," I said, surprising myself. I had been using my father's name professionally, but something about this moment made me want to reclaim my mother's maiden name, the name that connected me to Abuela Carmen, rather than to the people who had just discarded me. The elevator ride down felt endless. I stared at my reflection in the polished steel doors and saw a young woman who looked lost, defeated, smaller than she had that morning. But underneath the hurt and humiliation, something else was stirring. Something that felt like anger, but cleaner, more focused. In the lobby, Maria looked up from her desk with obvious concern. "Alex? Are you okay?" I managed a smile for her. "I'll be fine, Maria. Take care of yourself." The Phoenix sun hit me like a wall as I stepped outside. The parking lot wavered in the heat, creating the illusion that everything was underwater. I sat in my car for a long time, air conditioning blasting, trying to process what had just happened. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, my roommate and closest friend. "How's your day going? Coffee later?" I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. How do you tell someone that your entire life plan has just been demolished? That the people you trusted most have decided you're worthless? Instead of answering, I drove home to our downtown loft, a converted warehouse space that Sarah and I had been sharing since college. She was in the kitchen when I walked in, stirring something that smelled like cinnamon and comfort. "You're home early," she said, looking up with a smile that faded when she saw my face. "What happened?" I collapsed onto our secondhand couch and told her everything. Sarah listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each detail. When I finished, she sat down beside me and wrapped me in a hug that smelled like vanilla and safety. "They're idiots," she said simply, "and they just made the biggest mistake of their lives." "I don't know what I'm going to do," I admitted. This was supposed to be my future. The family business, carrying on the legacy. Now I'm just unemployed. Sarah pulled back to look at me. "You're not just unemployed. You're free. Free to build something better than what they offered." I wanted to believe her, but the hurt was too fresh, the rejection too complete. For the first time in my adult life, I had no plan, no clear path forward. I was 25 years old with a business degree, 3 years of experience that would be hard to explain to future employers, and a family that had made it clear I was dispensable. That evening, I sat on our small balcony watching the sun set behind the downtown skyline. The city looked beautiful from up there, full of possibility and promise. But I felt disconnected from it all, like I was watching someone else's life, through a window. My phone rang. For a moment, I hoped it might be one of my parents calling to apologize, to say they had made a mistake. Instead, it was Dave Chen, the senior project manager I had worked with on several occasions. "Alex, I heard what happened. I'm so sorry." Word traveled fast in the construction industry, especially in a city like Phoenix where everyone knew everyone. I felt a fresh wave of humiliation knowing that my professional failure was already becoming office gossip. "It's fine, Dave. I'll figure something out. Actually, that's why I'm calling. Can we meet for coffee tomorrow? There's something I want to discuss with you." I almost said no. The last thing I wanted was to be someone's charity case, to have colleagues take pity on the girl who couldn't cut it in her own family's business. But something in Dave's tone suggested this wasn't about pity. "Okay," I said. "Desert Bloom at 10? Perfect. And Alex? Don't let them make you think you're not capable. Some of us have been paying attention to your work." After he hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness and thought about Abuela Carmen. She had come to Arizona with nothing, worked multiple jobs while raising 3 children, and eventually saved enough to buy the land that became the foundation of Anderson Construction. She had believed in building something that would last, something that would provide for future generations. My parents had taken her legacy and turned it into a weapon against her own granddaughter. But maybe Sarah was right. Maybe being cast out wasn't the end of my story. Maybe it was the beginning. The next morning, I dressed carefully for my meeting with Dave. Not in the conservative business attire I had worn to Anderson Construction, but in clothes that felt more like me: dark jeans, a crisp white shirt, and the turquoise jewelry that reminded me of my grandmother's homeland. Desert Bloom Cafe was busy with the usual mix of freelancers, students, and business people seeking refuge from corporate offices. Dave was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee and an expression that was hard to read. "Thanks for coming," he said as I sat down. "How are you holding up?" "I'm surviving," I said, accepting the coffee gratefully, though I'm not sure what comes next. Dave leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. "What comes next? Depends on what you want. Are you looking to work for another construction company, or are you interested in building something new?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've been watching you for 3 years, Alex. While your family was having you file papers and answer phones, I saw you talking to clients, solving problems, identifying opportunities they couldn't see. That client retention analysis you were working on, it's brilliant. It addresses issues that have been costing the industry millions." I felt a flush of pride, followed immediately by skepticism. If it's so brilliant, why didn't anyone at Anderson Construction pay attention to it? "Because they couldn't see past their own assumptions," Dave said bluntly. "Your brother gets credit for projects he didn't manage. Your parents see what they expect to see. But some of us have been paying attention to your actual contributions." He pulled out a tablet and opened a document. "Remember the Tempe Medical Center project? The one where the client was threatening to pull out because of communication issues?" I nodded. It had been a nightmare situation, with the client feeling ignored and the project timeline falling apart due to poor coordination. "You fixed that," Dave continued. "You personally called the client, identified their concerns, coordinated between our teams and theirs, and turned a potential lawsuit into a successful completion. Your parents never knew because Michael took credit for saving the project." The memory was bittersweet. I had been proud of my work on that project, but when Michael presented it to the family as his own crisis management success, I had been too intimidated to speak up. "There's more," Dave said, scrolling through the document. "The Chandler Retail Complex, the Paradise Valley Custom Homes, the Ahwatukee Office Park. You've been the real problem solver on half our major projects, but you've been invisible in the official records." I stared at the tablet, seeing my work laid out in black and white. Projects I had saved, clients I had satisfied, problems I had solved while my family dismissed me as dead weight. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. Dave smiled. "Because I'm starting my own firm and I want you to be my partner." The words hung in the air between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. Dave Chen wanted me as a business partner. Not an employee, not an assistant, but an equal partner in building something from the ground up. After years of being treated like an inconvenience in my own family's company, the concept felt almost foreign. "A partner?" I repeated, needing to hear it again to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. Dave nodded, his expression serious but warm. 50-50 ownership. Chen Martinez Construction and Development. We split everything equally. Responsibilities, profits, decision-making authority, everything. I took a sip of my coffee, buying time to process what he was offering. Dave Chen was 15 years older than me, with an engineering degree from UC Berkeley and 20 years of experience in commercial construction. He had managed some of the biggest projects in Arizona, earned the respect of clients and contractors across the Southwest. And he wanted to partner with someone who had just been fired from her own family's business. "Dave, I appreciate the offer, but let's be realistic here. You have the experience, the reputation, the client connections. What exactly would I bring to this partnership besides my spectacular failure at Anderson Construction?" He laughed, not mockingly, but with genuine amusement. "Alex, you really don't see it, do you? You think your value is tied to what your family thinks of you." Before I could respond, he pulled out his phone and started scrolling through his contacts. "I'm going to call 3 people right now, former clients of Anderson Construction, people whose projects you were involved with. I want you to listen to what they say about their experience working with you." The first call was to Maria Santos, the project manager for the Tempe Medical Center. Dave put the call on speaker after explaining that he was considering a business venture and wanted her honest opinion about working with me. "Alexandra Martinez?" Maria's voice came through clearly. Oh my God, she was the only reason that project succeeded. When everything started falling apart and we couldn't get straight answers from anyone at Anderson, Alex stepped in and actually listened to our concerns. She didn't just pass along messages, she understood our needs and made things happen. I told my board that if Anderson had more people like her, we'd work with them again in a heartbeat. Dave ended the call and immediately dialed another number. This time it was James Wright from the Chandler Retail Complex project. "Alex Martinez was phenomenal," James said without hesitation. "Professional, responsive, and she actually cared about getting things right instead of just getting them done. When we had that issue with the HVAC systems, she didn't just file our complaint and wait for someone else to handle it. She researched the problem, coordinated with the subcontractors, and kept us informed every step of the way. Honestly, she's the reason we didn't take our business elsewhere." The third call was to Linda Huang from Paradise Valley Custom Homes. Her response was even more enthusiastic. Alexandra was incredible to work with. She anticipated problems before they became crises, communicated clearly about timelines and costs, and treated our project like it was the most important thing in the world. I've worked with a lot of construction companies over the years, and she's one of the best project coordinators I've ever encountered. Is she available for freelance work? Because I have 3 projects coming up that I'd love to have her manage. After Dave ended the final call, I sat in stunned silence. These clients weren't just being polite, they were genuinely enthusiastic about my work, describing skills and contributions that my own family had dismissed as insignificant. "Still think you don't bring anything to the table?" Dave asked gently. I felt tears threatening and blinked them back. I had no idea they felt that way. "Because nobody told you. Your family was too busy propping up Michael to recognize what you were actually accomplishing. But the clients noticed, the subcontractors noticed, other people in the industry noticed." Dave reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder thick with documents. "I've been planning this for months, Alex. Not the partnership part, that's new. But leaving Anderson Construction to start my own firm has been in the works since last fall." He opened the folder and spread out business plans, financial projections, and market analysis reports. "The construction industry in Phoenix is booming, but there's a gap in the market. Most companies are either big corporate entities that treat clients like numbers or small family operations that can't handle complex projects. There's room for a firm that combines expertise with personal attention." I studied the documents, impressed by the thoroughness of his planning. Dave had identified target markets, analyzed competitor weaknesses, and developed a business model that emphasized client relationships and project quality over volume. "Your client retention analysis fits perfectly into this vision," he continued. "The problems you identified at Anderson Construction aren't unique to that company. They're industry-wide issues that most firms ignore because they're focused on landing new contracts instead of maintaining existing relationships." As I read through his projections, something began to shift inside me. The hurt and humiliation from yesterday's firing were still there, but they were being overshadowed by something else: excitement, possibility, the chance to build something that reflected my values instead of constantly trying to fit into someone else's vision. "What's the timeline?" I asked. "I've already secured initial funding through a combination of personal savings and a small business loan. We could be operational within 6 weeks if we move quickly on licensing and bonding. The real question is whether you're ready to take this kind of risk." Risk. The word should have terrified me. I had no savings, no backup plan, and a family who had made it clear they wouldn't support me if I failed. But instead of fear, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope. "What about clients? Starting from scratch seems—" "We won't be starting from scratch," Dave interrupted. "I've been in this industry for 2 decades. I have relationships with suppliers, subcontractors, and clients who trust my work. Plus, based on those phone calls, we already have 3 potential projects waiting for us." The next few hours passed in a blur of planning and possibility. Dave walked me through his vision for the company, from the types of projects we would target to the company culture we wanted to create. Everything felt different from my experience at Anderson Construction. Instead of hierarchy and competition, Dave talked about collaboration and mutual respect. "I need to think about this," I finally said as the afternoon crowd began filtering into the cafe around us. "Of course, take whatever time you need. But Alex?" He gathered up his papers and looked at me seriously. "Don't let yesterday's conversation with your family influence your decision. They were wrong about your value, and they were wrong about your potential." I drove home through the desert landscape, my mind racing with possibilities and fears, in equal measure. The mountains looked different somehow, less like barriers and more like challenges waiting to be conquered. By the time I reached the loft, I had made my decision. Sarah was working at her laptop when I walked in, probably designing another website for one of her freelance clients. She looked up as I entered, clearly eager to hear about my meeting with Dave. "Well?" she said, closing her laptop and giving me her full attention. I told her about Dave's offer, the client testimonials, and the business plan he had shared. As I talked, I watched her expression change from curiosity to excitement to something that looked like pride. "This is incredible, Alex. It's like the universe is telling you that getting fired was actually the best thing that could have happened." Maybe, I said, sinking into the couch beside her. But it's also terrifying. What if we fail? What if I'm not as good as those clients think I am? What if my family was right and I really don't have what it takes? Sarah turned to face me fully. Alex, I've known you for 7 years. I watched you struggle through every business class in college, not because you weren't smart enough, but because you were always thinking 3 steps ahead of everyone else. I've seen you solve problems that your professors couldn't figure out. I've watched you turn disaster situations into success stories. Your family's opinion of you says nothing about your abilities and everything about their blindness. That evening, I called Dave and accepted his partnership offer. The relief in his voice was palpable, and I realized that he had been just as nervous about my response as I had been about making the decision. "Welcome to Chen Martinez Construction and Development," he said. "We're going to build something amazing." The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Instead of dreading another day of menial tasks and family disappointment, I was excited about the challenges ahead. Dave and I had agreed to meet at his apartment to begin the practical work of starting our company. Dave lived in a converted warehouse space in the Arts District, all exposed brick and industrial fixtures. His dining room table was covered with documents, blueprints, and legal forms. He had already been working for hours when I arrived at 8 a.m. "Coffee's in the kitchen," he said, without looking up from a stack of licensing applications. "We have a lot to accomplish today." The morning flew by as we worked through the logistics of partnership agreements, business registration, and insurance requirements. Dave handled the technical and legal aspects while I focused on developing our client outreach strategy and project management systems. Around noon, my phone rang. The caller ID showed my mother's name, and I hesitated before answering. Part of me hoped she was calling to apologize, to acknowledge that firing me had been a mistake, but experience had taught me to expect disappointment from my family. "Alexandra?" My mother's voice was carefully controlled. "I heard you're planning to start some kind of consulting business." News traveled fast in the Phoenix construction industry. I wasn't surprised that word had reached my parents, but I was curious about their response. "It's a construction and development firm," I corrected. "Chen Martinez Construction and Development." There was a pause. "With Dave Chen? Alex, that's inadvisable." "Why is that inadvisable, Mom?" "Because you're going to be competing directly with Anderson Construction. That puts us all in an awkward position." I looked across the table at Dave, who was pretending not to listen, but obviously following every word of the conversation. "I'm not competing with anyone," I said carefully. "I'm building my own business." "Using knowledge and contacts you gained while working for us," my mother said, her tone sharpening. "That's ethically questionable at best." The accusation stung because it was so unfair. Everything I knew about client relationships and project management, I had learned through my own initiative and observation. Anderson Construction had never invested in my training or development. They had given me filing duties and expected me to be grateful. "I gained that knowledge through 3 years of work that you apparently considered worthless," I said. "And the contacts I made were through my own efforts to build relationships with clients that you ignored." "Alexandra, please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. We're family. We should be supporting each other, not creating unnecessary competition." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. When it served their purposes, I was dead weight they couldn't afford to carry. Now that I was striking out on my own, suddenly I was family again, and they wanted support and loyalty. "You're absolutely right," I said. "Family should support each other. I'll remember that the next time you need something from me." I ended the call and looked at Dave, who was watching me with concern. "Everything okay?" he asked. "It will be," I said. "But I think we need to be prepared for Anderson Construction to make things difficult for us." Dave nodded grimly. "I've been expecting that. Your father doesn't strike me as someone who handles competition gracefully, especially from people he's underestimated. The afternoon brought more challenges as we discovered that several suppliers who had worked with Dave at Anderson Construction were suddenly unavailable for quotes on our first potential project. When Dave called to follow up, the responses were evasive but consistent. They were too busy to take on new clients, or they had exclusive arrangements with other firms, or they simply weren't interested in working with startup companies. "This is Robert's doing," Dave said after the fifth rejection call. "He's using his influence to make it harder for us to get established." I felt a familiar anger building, but this time it was cleaner, more focused. Instead of the helpless rage I had felt during my firing, this felt like fuel for determination. "Then we find new suppliers," I said. "Better ones. Suppliers who want to work with a company that values partnerships over power plays." Dave smiled at my response. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." We spent the rest of the afternoon researching alternative suppliers and subcontractors. Many of them were smaller operations that had been shut out of major projects by established relationships between big construction firms and their preferred vendors. When I called to introduce Chen Martinez Construction and Development, their enthusiasm was immediate and genuine. By evening, we had assembled a network of suppliers and subcontractors who were eager to work with us. More importantly, we had identified a competitive advantage that Anderson Construction couldn't match. While they relied on established relationships and volume discounts, we could offer flexibility, attention to detail, and genuine partnership to both our clients and our vendors. That night, I sat on my balcony again, but this time the city lights looked different. Instead of watching someone else's life through a window, I felt connected to the energy and possibility surrounding me. Phoenix was growing rapidly, with new developments and construction projects launching every month. There was room for a firm like ours, room for an approach that prioritized relationships over transactions. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Heard about your new venture. Congratulations and good luck. You're going to need it." The message was unsigned, but the tone suggested it wasn't from a well-wisher. More likely it was from someone at Anderson Construction, possibly Michael, trying to unnerve me with vague threats. Instead of feeling intimidated, I felt energized. Let them play games and make veiled threats. While they were focused on undermining me, I would be focused on building something better. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of paperwork, planning, and preparation. Dave and I worked 18-hour days, handling everything from business licensing to marketing materials to project proposals. We rented a small office space in Scottsdale. Nothing fancy, but professional enough to meet with clients. Our first real test came when Linda Huang from Paradise Valley Custom Homes called to discuss a residential project. She wanted to build a luxury home for a tech executive who had relocated from California, and she specifically requested that I manage the project. "I've worked with Anderson Construction on several projects," she explained during our initial meeting. "The quality is good, but the communication is terrible. I spend half my time trying to get updates on project status and timeline changes. I need someone who will keep me informed and involved throughout the process." The project was exactly the type of challenge I had been hoping for. Complex enough to showcase our capabilities, but manageable enough that we could deliver exceptional results without overextending ourselves. "We'll provide weekly progress reports," I promised. Not just generic updates, but detailed information about what's been accomplished, what's coming next, and any potential issues we need to address proactively. "That would be revolutionary," Linda said with a laugh. "When can you start?" We shook hands on the deal that afternoon. Our first official contract as Chen Martinez Construction and Development. As I drove home, I called Dave to share the news. "Linda Huang just signed with us," I announced as soon as he answered. "The Paradise Valley project? Alex, that's incredible. This is exactly the kind of client relationship that will establish our reputation." That evening, Sarah insisted on celebrating with dinner at our favorite Thai restaurant. As we sat sharing pad Thai and talking about the future, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Contentment. Not the anxious striving that had characterized my time at Anderson Construction, but genuine satisfaction with the direction my life was taking. "You look different," Sarah observed as we walked home through the downtown streets. "Different how?" "Confident, like you finally know who you are and what you're capable of." She was right. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't trying to prove myself to anyone or seeking approval from people who had already decided I wasn't worth their investment. I was building something that reflected my own values and vision. The feeling lasted until I got home and found an envelope that had been slipped under our door. No return address, no postmark, just my name written in block letters across expensive, cream-colored paper. Inside was a single sheet of letterhead from Anderson Construction and Development. At the bottom, in my father's handwriting, was a brief message. "Some mistakes can't be undone. Think carefully about your next steps." I stared at the note for a long time, trying to decide if it was a threat or a warning. Either way, it confirmed what I already suspected. My family wasn't going to let me walk away quietly and build my own success. They were going to make this personal. I took a photo of the note and sent it to Dave with a message. "We need to be ready for whatever they're planning." His response came back immediately. "Let them come. We have something they don't." "What's that?" I texted back. The truth about who really built their success. I fell asleep that night thinking about his words and wondering what he meant. The truth about Anderson Construction's success had always seemed straightforward. My father's business acumen, my mother's organizational skills, Michael's natural leadership abilities. But Dave's comment suggested there was more to the story, something I hadn't seen or understood. The answer would come sooner than I expected, and it would change everything I thought I knew about my family's business and my own place in there. History. The next morning brought our first major test as a new company. Linda Huang called at 7 a.m. with panic in her voice. "Alex, we have a problem. The tech executive I told you about? He just found out that Anderson Construction submitted a bid for his project too. A significantly lower bid." I felt my stomach drop. "How is that possible? We haven't even finalized our proposal yet." "That's what I want to know. Robert Anderson called my client directly last night and offered to build the same house for 30% less than your estimate. He said he was doing it as a courtesy to an old friend, but something feels wrong about this." I assured Linda that we would look into the situation and get back to her within the hour. As soon as I hung up, I called Dave. "They somehow got access to our proposal," I said without preamble. "Anderson Construction is underbidding us on the Paradise Valley project." Dave was quiet for a long moment. "That's impossible unless—" "Alex, did you save any work files on your computer while you were still employed there?" "Just some client contact information and project templates. Nothing proprietary. Check your cloud storage right now." I opened my laptop and logged into my personal cloud account. What I found made my blood run cold. Dozens of files that I had never uploaded, including our complete business plan, financial projections, and the Paradise Valley project proposal. "Dave, there are files here that I never put here. Someone has been accessing my accounts." "We need to meet. Now. And Alex? Don't access any more files from that computer. We may be dealing with something bigger than simple competitive sabotage." As I drove to meet Dave, my mind raced through the implications of what we had discovered. Someone had been monitoring my digital activities, possibly for weeks or months. They had access to our business strategies, our financial planning, our client proposals. Every advantage we thought we had was compromised, but as the initial shock wore off, it was replaced by something else. Determination. If my family wanted to play dirty, they were about to discover that they had underestimated me one more time. And this time, that mistake was going to cost them everything. Dave was waiting for me at a coffee shop I had never been to before, tucked away in a strip mall on the outskirts of Scottsdale. The precautions seemed excessive until I saw the expression on his face as I walked in. This wasn't paranoia. This was strategic thinking from someone who understood corporate warfare better than I did. "Leave your phone in the car," he said quietly, as I approached his table. "And your laptop bag." I did as he asked, feeling slightly ridiculous but trusting his judgment. When I returned, he had already ordered coffee for both of us and positioned himself where he could see both entrances to the cafe. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, sliding into the seat across from him. "Longer than either of us realized." Dave opened a manila folder filled with printed documents. "After you called this morning, I started digging into some things that had been bothering me for months. Coincidences that weren't really coincidences." He spread out a timeline that made my stomach clench. Projects that Chen Martinez had been considering, suddenly taken by Anderson Construction before we had even submitted proposals. Suppliers, who had seemed eager to work with us, then mysteriously became unavailable after conversations with my father's company. Subcontractors who had quoted us reasonable prices, only to withdraw their bids citing scheduling conflicts. "They've been tracking our every move," Dave said. "But it's more sophisticated than just hacking your cloud storage. Someone inside Anderson Construction has been systematically undermining us since before we even officially launched." I studied the documents, seeing patterns that chilled me. This level of coordination requires planning, and resources, and someone with detailed knowledge of our business strategy. Exactly. Which means someone very close to the situation has been feeding information to your family. The implication hit me like a physical blow. "You think we have a mole?" "I think your family has been planning this campaign against us since the day they fired you. Maybe even before." Dave pulled out another document, this one a printed email thread that made my hands shake as I read it. The emails were dated 3 weeks before my firing, a conversation between my father and someone identified only as MR. "We need to make sure Alex doesn't land somewhere she can cause problems," my father had written. "Her client relationships could be valuable to a competitor." The response from MR was equally chilling. "Agreed. I'll make sure any opportunities get redirected appropriately. She won't be able to establish herself independently." "Who is MR?" I asked, though I was starting to suspect I already knew. "Michael Rodriguez. He's Anderson Construction's new business development director. Started there about 6 months ago." The name meant nothing to me, but Dave's expression suggested it should. "You know him?" "I know of him. He's got a reputation in the industry for aggressive competitive tactics. Some people call it strategic intelligence gathering. Others call it corporate espionage." I felt the walls of the coffee shop closing in around me. "They hired someone specifically to destroy our business before we could even start it." "It looks that way. But, Alex, this might actually be good news." I stared at him incredulously. How is any of this good news? "Because they're scared. Companies don't invest this kind of time and resources in eliminating competition unless they see that competition as a genuine threat. Your family knows something about your capabilities that they've never been willing to admit." Dave was right, but the knowledge didn't make me feel empowered. It made me feel hunted. Every conversation, every business plan, every client relationship had been monitored and manipulated by people I had trusted with my future. "What do we do now?" I asked. "We fight back, but we do it smart." Dave gathered up the documents and leaned forward. "First, we need to secure our communications and business data. No more cloud storage, no more email discussions about sensitive topics. Everything important gets discussed in person. That's going to make it difficult to run a business, temporarily. Once we establish some security protocols and figure out exactly how they're accessing our information, we can adapt." Dave outlined a plan that sounded like something from a spy novel. Encrypted communications, secure document storage, background checks on anyone we considered hiring. The overhead alone would eat into our limited startup capital. There's something else, Dave said, his voice dropping even lower. I think this goes deeper than just competitive sabotage. I think your family has been systematically stealing credit for work they didn't do, and they're terrified that you know enough to expose them. What do you mean? Dave pulled out a folder I hadn't noticed before, this one thick with project documentation and financial records. Remember how I told you that you've been the real problem solver on half of Anderson Construction's major projects? I wasn't exaggerating. He opened the folder to reveal detailed records of client communications, project timelines, and problem resolution reports. Most of them had my name on them, but many had been altered to show Michael or other Anderson Construction employees as the primary contact. The Tempe Medical Center project that we called about yesterday? According to Anderson Construction's official records, Michael managed the client relationship and resolved the HVC crisis. But I saved copies of the original documentation. You were the one who identified the problem, coordinated with the subcontractors, and maintained client communication throughout the crisis. I stared at documents that showed a systematic pattern of credit theft spanning 3 years. Projects where I had done the substantive work, only to have my contributions minimized or erased entirely from the official records. It's not just about taking credit, Dave continued. It's about building a false narrative of Michael's competence and your incompetence. They needed to justify paying him more and giving him more responsibility, so they rewrote history to make it look like he was the valuable employee and you were the deadweight. The scope of the deception was breathtaking. It wasn't just that my family had undervalued my contributions. They had actively stolen my achievements and used them to build someone else's reputation. How long have you known about this? I asked. I started noticing discrepancies about a year ago. Small things at first. Project reports that didn't match my memory of how problems were actually solved. Client feedback that mentioned you specifically, but internal memos that gave credit to other people. Dave's expression was a mixture of anger and regret. I should have said something sooner. I should have documented it more systematically. But I kept thinking that maybe I was misremembering, or that it was just normal office politics. Why didn't you ever talk to me about it? Because I wasn't sure how you'd react, and honestly, I wasn't sure if you knew and were okay with it, or if you were as blind to it as everyone else seemed to be. I thought back to all the times I had felt confused about recognition and credit, all the occasions when I had done significant work only to watch someone else get praised for the results. I had assumed it was normal workplace dynamics, the price of being young and inexperienced in a family business. They gaslit me, I said quietly. For 3 years, they made me believe I wasn't contributing anything valuable, while they were literally stealing my work and giving it to Michael. And now they're terrified that starting your own company will expose the truth about where Anderson Construction's recent success really came from. The revelation was devastating and liberating at the same time. Devastating because it meant that people I loved had been systematically betraying me for years. Liberating because it finally explained the disconnect between my own sense of my abilities and my family's assessment of my value. We need to document everything, I said. Every project, every client interaction, every instance where they took credit for my work. I've already started. Dave showed me a spreadsheet that detailed dozens of projects over the past 3 years. But we need more than just my observations. We need original documents, client testimonials, anything that can prove your actual contributions. I have copies of a lot of client communications on my personal email, and I kept notes on most of the major projects I worked on. Good. We'll need all of that. But Alex, we have to be careful about how we use this information. If we go public with accusations of credit theft and document manipulation, Anderson Construction will claim we're disgruntled former employees making false accusations. So what's the alternative? Dave smiled for the first time since our conversation began. We let our work speak for itself. We build Chen Martinez Construction into such a successful company that the contrast becomes obvious to everyone in the industry. Over the next several hours, we developed a two-pronged strategy. Publicly, we would focus on building our reputation through exceptional client service and project quality. Privately, we would document the full extent of Anderson Construction's deception, building a case that we might never have to use, but that would be there if we needed it. "There's one more thing," Dave said as we prepared to leave. "I think you should consider reaching out to some of the clients whose projects you actually managed. Not to badmouth Anderson Construction, but to let them know that you're available for future work. Won't that look like I'm trying to steal clients from my former employer? You're not stealing anything. You're reconnecting with people who valued your work and might want to continue working with you in your new capacity." The distinction mattered, both legally and ethically. I wasn't trying to damage Anderson Construction or violate any non-compete agreements. I was simply letting satisfied clients know that the person who had actually managed their projects was now available as an independent contractor. That afternoon, I made a series of phone calls that fundamentally changed my understanding of my own professional reputation. Client after client expressed genuine enthusiasm about working with me again, often mentioning specific instances where my involvement had made the difference between project success and failure. "Alexandra, I'm so glad you called," said Patricia Williams from the Ahwatukee Office Park project. "I was just telling my partners that we needed to find someone like you for our next development, someone who actually listens and follows through on commitments. You were the only person at Anderson Construction who seemed to understand our timeline constraints," added Robert Kim from the Chandler Retail Complex. "Everyone else treated our concerns like they were unreasonable demands." By the end of the day, I had 3 solid leads for new projects and a waiting list of clients who wanted to be contacted when Chen Martinez Construction was ready to take on additional work. "This is incredible," I told Dave as we compared notes. These people weren't just satisfied with my work. They were specifically impressed by qualities that my family claimed I didn't have: organization, communication, problem-solving, client relations. "Because those are your actual strengths," Dave said. "Your family's assessment of your abilities was never based on objective observation. It was based on their need to maintain a narrative that justified their treatment of you." That evening, I sat in my apartment reviewing 3 years' worth of project notes and client communications. The pattern was undeniable. I had been consistently successful at the aspects of construction management that mattered most to clients: communication, problem-solving, and follow-through. Meanwhile, the family members who had been promoted above me had focused on the aspects that mattered most to company politics: networking, self-promotion, and taking credit for other people's work. Sarah found me at the kitchen table surrounded by documents, highlighting passages that demonstrated my involvement in major project successes. "This looks like you're building a legal case," she observed. "Maybe I am. Not for a lawsuit necessarily, but for something. I need to understand the full scope of what they did to me." Sarah sat down across from me and started looking through some of the documents. Her expression grew darker as she read client testimonials that praised my work, while Anderson Construction's internal records minimized my contributions. "Alex, this is fraud. They literally falsified documents to steal credit for your work." "It's not that simple. They didn't change anything that was legally binding. They just controlled the narrative about who deserved recognition for various achievements. That's still fraud. Maybe not criminal fraud, but definitely professional fraud." Sarah had a point, but I wasn't sure what to do with it. Taking legal action against my own family felt like crossing a line that I couldn't uncross. At the same time, letting them continue to benefit from stolen credit while systematically undermining my new business felt like allowing myself to be victimized indefinitely. My phone rang, interrupting my internal debate. The caller ID showed Linda Huang's number, and I answered, hoping she had good news about the Paradise Valley project. "Alex, I have an update about the Anderson construction situation," she said without preamble. "It's worse than we thought." My heart sank. How much worse? I did some checking with other developers in the area. Anderson Construction has been calling around, telling people that you stole proprietary information when you left the company. They're claiming that your new business is built on trade secrets and client lists that belong to them. The accusation was so outrageously false that I was momentarily speechless. That's completely untrue. I have documentation proving that all of my client relationships were built through my own work. I believe you. But Alex, they're not just making these claims privately. They've hired a public relations firm to manage what they're calling a brand protection campaign. They're planning to go public with allegations that you violated your employment agreement and stole confidential information. I felt like I was falling through space. Bad enough that my family had systematically stolen credit for my work. Now they were planning to destroy my professional reputation with false accusations of theft and corporate espionage. When? I asked. Soon, possibly as early as next week. I'm telling you this because I think you need to be prepared to defend yourself publicly. After Linda hung up, I called Dave immediately. He listened to the update with grim silence, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly just absorbing the implications of what we were facing. "This changes everything," he said when I finished. "They're not just trying to compete with us, they're trying to destroy us preemptively. What do? We accelerate our timeline. Everything we were planning to do over the next few months, we need to do in the next few weeks. Client testimonials, project documentation, proof of your actual contributions to Anderson Construction's success. We need to be ready to defend ourselves with facts when they attack us with lies. Dave, I'm not sure I'm strong enough for this kind of fight." "You are, and you're not fighting alone. But Alex, there's something else you need to know. Something I've been hesitating to tell you." His tone made my stomach clench. "What?" "I think the reason they're escalating so aggressively is because they know something we don't. Something about their own vulnerabilities that makes your independence especially threatening to them." "What kind of vulnerabilities?" Dave was quiet for a long moment. "I've been doing some research into Anderson Construction's financials, public records, industry reports, things like that. Their recent growth has been impressive, but it's also been built on a very narrow foundation." "Meaning what?" "Meaning that most of their major successes over the past 3 years have been projects where you were the primary client contact. If those clients start following you to Chen Martinez Construction, Anderson Construction could face serious financial difficulties." The implication was staggering. My family wasn't just afraid of competition from my new business. They were afraid that losing access to my client relationships and problem-solving abilities would expose how dependent their recent success had been on my uncredited contributions. "They need me to fail," I said slowly. "Not just to avoid competition, but to maintain the illusion that their success was based on their own abilities rather than stolen credit from my work." "Exactly. Which means they'll do whatever it takes to prevent you from establishing an independent reputation." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and thinking about the choice that lay ahead of me. I could back down, dissolve Chen Martinez Construction before it really got started, maybe even apologize to my family and ask for my old job back. It would be easier, safer, less confrontational. Or I could fight. Not just for my new business, but for the truth about my contributions to Anderson Construction's success. Not just for my professional reputation, but for my right to build something based on my own abilities rather than someone else's assessment of my worth. By morning, I had made my decision. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was up against, and that meant doing some research of my own into Anderson Construction's recent business practices. What I discovered would make everything, that had happened so far looked like amateur hour. My family hadn't just been stealing credit for my work. They had been systematically defrauding clients, suppliers, and partners in ways that could bring down their entire company. And they were about to learn that their useless daughter had been paying much closer attention than they ever imagined. The records I needed were hiding in plain sight. While my family had been busy orchestrating their campaign against me, they had forgotten that I still had access to industry databases and professional networks that I had built independently of Anderson Construction. More importantly, they had underestimated my ability to piece together information from multiple sources. I started with the Arizona Registrar of Contractors database, cross-referencing Anderson Construction's recent projects with complaint records and inspection reports. What I found made my blood run cold. Over the past 18 months, there had been 17 formal complaints filed against Anderson Construction for various violations: missed deadlines, substandard materials, failure to obtain proper permits, and inadequate supervision of subcontractors. 17 complaints in 18 months for a company that had prided itself on maintaining a spotless reputation for over 2 decades. But here's what made it even more disturbing. Every single complaint corresponded to a project that had been managed by Michael or other employees after I had been removed from client-facing responsibilities. The pattern was unmistakable. Projects I had managed through completion showed 0 complaints. Projects where I had been involved in the initial phases but removed before completion showed problems that began appearing immediately after my involvement ended. Projects that I had never been allowed to touch were disasters from start to finish. Dave met me at a secure location the next morning, a small business center where we could rent a private conference room by the hour. I had printed out everything I had discovered, organizing it into a presentation that laid out the full scope of what we were dealing with. "This isn't just about stolen credit anymore," I told him as I spread out the documentation. "Anderson Construction is in serious trouble, and they're using me as a scapegoat." I walked him through the complaint records, showing how the company's performance had deteriorated dramatically once my involvement in projects had been minimized. The evidence was overwhelming and damning. "Look at the Scottsdale Medical Plaza project," I said, pointing to a thick file of correspondence. "I managed the initial client relationship and site preparation. Everything went smoothly until month 4, when my father transferred me to another project and put Michael in charge. Within 2 weeks, they had permit violations, supplier disputes, and a client threatening to terminate the contract." Dave studied the documents with growing amazement. "How did they resolve the situation?" "They didn't. Not really. They threw money at the problems, brought in expensive consultants, and managed to complete the project 6 weeks late and $40,000 over budget. The client filed a formal complaint and refused to provide a reference for future work." "And Anderson Construction's internal records show this how?" I pulled out another set of documents. According to their project reports, the delays were caused by unforeseen site complications and regulatory changes. Michael is credited with heroic efforts to minimize client impact despite challenging circumstances. Dave laughed, but there was no humor in it. They turned a disaster into a success story by lying about what actually happened. "It gets worse. Look at the timeline of when these problems started appearing." I had created a chart that showed the correlation between my reduced involvement in projects and the increase in complaints, cost overruns, and client dissatisfaction. "The decline begins exactly when they started limiting your client interactions," Dave observed, "and it accelerates after they fired you completely. Which means their recent success has been built on covering up failures rather than preventing them. They've been spending money to hide problems instead of solving them." Dave leaned back in his chair, processing the implications. "Alex, this is explosive. If this information became public, it would destroy Anderson Construction's reputation and probably cost them most of their existing contracts. Which explains why they're so desperate to discredit me before I can establish my own reputation," If clients start working with me and comparing the experience to their recent projects with Anderson Construction, the contrast will be obvious. But there was more. I had also discovered financial irregularities that suggested Anderson Construction had been engaging in practices that bordered on fraud. Billing clients for materials that were never delivered, charging for supervisory hours that were never worked, claiming permit and inspection costs that were significantly higher than the amounts actually paid to regulatory agencies. They've been systematically overcharging clients while cutting corners on actual project delivery, I explained, showing Dave a spreadsheet that detailed the discrepancies. The extra money has been used to cover cost overruns on other projects and maintain their profit margins despite declining efficiency. This is criminal, Dave said flatly. This isn't just poor business practices, this is theft. And they're about to accuse me of being the thief. The irony was breathtaking. My family was preparing to destroy my reputation with false accusations of stealing trade secrets and client information, while they had been literally stealing money from clients through fraudulent billing practices. We need to take this to the authorities, Dave said. Do we? I mean, these are my parents we're talking about, my brother. If I expose this, I'm not just defending myself, I'm destroying them. Dave looked at me seriously. Alex, they made that choice when they decided to frame you for crimes you didn't commit. You're not destroying them. You're revealing what they've already done to themselves. He was right, but that didn't make the decision any easier. Whatever complicated feelings I had about my family, the idea of being responsible for their professional destruction felt overwhelming. Let me ask you something, Dave continued. How many clients have been defrauded by these billing practices? How many contractors have been forced to absorb cost overruns because Anderson Construction blamed them for problems that were actually caused by poor management? I looked at the documentation spread across the table. Dozens of projects, hundreds of thousands of dollars in fraudulent charges, countless small businesses and individual contractors who had been blamed for failures that weren't their fault. They've been victimizing people for over a year, I said quietly, and they're about to victimize you too unless you stop them. That afternoon, I made one of the hardest decisions of my life. I contacted Patricia Coleman, an attorney who specialized in construction industry disputes. Ms. Coleman had a reputation for handling complex cases involving fraud, breach of contract, and professional misconduct. Her office was in a sleek high-rise in downtown Phoenix, all glass and steel that reflected the desert mountains. Ms. Coleman herself was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "What exactly are you hoping to accomplish, Ms. Martinez?" she asked after I had laid out the situation. "I want to defend myself against false accusations that haven't been made public yet, and I want to make sure that Anderson Construction's fraudulent practices are exposed before they can harm more clients." Those are two very different objectives with very different legal implications. Let's talk about each one separately. Ms. Coleman explained that preparing a defense against anticipated defamation required building a comprehensive case proving my actual contributions to Anderson Construction's projects. This would involve collecting client testimonials, project documentation, and evidence of my professional competence. The good news is that truth is an absolute defense against defamation, she said. If you can prove that your professional reputation is based on actual achievements rather than stolen information, their accusations will backfire spectacularly. And the fraud investigation? That's more complicated. Reporting suspected fraud to regulatory authorities is a serious step that will trigger investigations you can't control. Once you file a complaint, the process takes on a life of its own. Ms. Coleman outlined the potential consequences of filing a fraud complaint. Anderson Construction would face regulatory investigations, financial audits, and possible criminal charges. Their business licenses could be suspended or revoked. Clients who had been overcharged could file civil lawsuits seeking damages. Your family's company could be completely destroyed, she said bluntly. Is that an outcome you're prepared to accept? I thought about my father's dismissive words when he fired me. You're dead weight, Alex. This company doesn't have room for charity cases. I thought about my mother's casual agreement that I didn't fit in the family business. I thought about Michael's smug satisfaction as he watched me be escorted out by security. They made their choice when they decided to commit fraud, I said. I'm just making sure there are consequences for that choice. Ms. Coleman nodded approvingly. Then we have work to do. Over the next week, I threw myself into building the most comprehensive defense case possible. I contacted every client I had worked with during my time at Anderson Construction, requesting written testimonials about their experience working with me. The responses were overwhelmingly positive and surprisingly detailed. Alexandra was the most professional and responsive project coordinator we've ever worked with, wrote Dr. Sarah Kim from the Tempe Medical Center project. She anticipated problems before they became crises, communicated clearly about timelines and costs, and treated our concerns with genuine respect. We specifically requested her involvement in our subsequent renovation project because of her exceptional performance. Without Alexandra's intervention, our retail complex project would have been a complete disaster, added James Patterson from Chandler Retail Development. When communication broke down between Anderson Construction and our design team, she stepped in and personally coordinated resolution of multiple complex issues. Her attention to detail and problem-solving abilities saved us months of delays and thousands of dollars in cost overruns. Client after client described specific instances where my involvement had made the difference between project success and failure. More importantly, they provided detailed accounts of my contributions that directly contradicted Anderson Construction's internal records, minimizing my role. Dave had been conducting his own investigation into Anderson Construction's recent financial practices. What he discovered was even more damaging than what I had found in the public records. I've been talking to subcontractors and suppliers who have worked with Anderson Construction recently, he told me during one of our secure meetings. The stories they're telling paint a picture of systematic exploitation. He had documented instances where Anderson Construction had blamed subcontractors for project delays that were actually caused by poor planning and inadequate supervision. Small contractors had been forced to absorb cost overruns that should have been Anderson Construction's responsibility. Suppliers had been pressured to provide materials at below-cost prices with promises of future work that never materialized. They've been using their reputation and size to bully smaller businesses into accepting unfair terms, Dave explained. And when projects go wrong, they shift all the blame and financial consequences to people who can't afford to fight back. The pattern was clear and disturbing. Anderson Construction had been covering up their declining performance by exploiting their relationships with smaller businesses and individual contractors. They had maintained their profit margins by systematically cheating everyone they worked with. How did they think they could get away with this? I asked. Because it worked, Dave said simply. Until now, no one has been in a position to see the full pattern. Individual contractors and clients might notice problems with their specific projects, but they didn't have access to information about other projects to recognize the systematic nature of the fraud. But I do. You do. And more importantly, you have the professional credibility to be believed when you report it. The next step was gathering hard evidence that would stand up to regulatory scrutiny. This meant obtaining copies of invoices, billing records, permit applications, and inspection reports that would prove the discrepancies between what Anderson Construction charged clients and what they actually paid for materials and services. Some of this information was available through public records requests, but other documentation required cooperation from clients and contractors who had been victimized by Anderson Construction's practices. I need you to understand the risk you're taking, Ms. Coleman warned me during one of our preparation sessions. Once we file these complaints, Anderson Construction will know exactly who provided the evidence against them. They'll come after you with everything they have. They're already coming after me with everything they have, I pointed out. At least this way, I'm fighting back instead of just defending. Ms. Coleman smiled grimly. Good, because you're going to need that attitude for what comes next. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Maria Santos, the project manager from Tempe Medical Center, called me with information that changed everything. Alexandra, I hope this isn't inappropriate, but there's something you need to know about your former employer, she said. We've been having problems with the follow-up work they did on our project. Serious problems. Maria explained that Anderson Construction had been contracted to complete additional renovations at the medical center 6 months after the original project I had managed. The new work, supervised by Michael, had been plagued with problems from the beginning. We're finding code violations, substandard materials, and work that doesn't match the specifications in our contract, she said. When we complained, Anderson Construction claimed the problems were caused by pre-existing conditions from the original construction. But Alexandra, you and I both know that the original work was flawless. Maria had documentation proving that Anderson Construction was trying to blame current problems on work that had been completed successfully under my supervision. More damaging, she had discovered billing irregularities where Anderson Construction had charged for materials and labor that were never actually provided. I'm planning to file a formal complaint with the state licensing board, she said. But I wanted you to know first, in case this information is helpful for whatever you're dealing with. Maria, would you be willing to provide a written statement about your experience with Anderson Construction's recent work compared to the project I managed? Absolutely. And Alexandra? Several other medical facilities in the area have had similar problems with Anderson Construction recently. I think you should talk to them. Over the next few days, I contacted administrators at 4 other medical facilities that had worked with Anderson Construction in the past year. The stories were remarkably consistent. Projects that started well but deteriorated after I was no longer involved. Billing discrepancies that hadn't been noticed until problems arose and clients started scrutinizing their contracts more carefully. Poor communication and inadequate supervision that resulted in code violations and safety issues. It's like they became a completely different company, said Robert Chen, facilities manager at Desert Springs Hospital. We had worked with Anderson Construction for years without any problems. Then suddenly every project was a struggle, every deadline was missed, every budget was exceeded. When did you first notice the change in their performance? I asked. About 6 months ago, right around the time we stopped seeing you at project meetings. The timeline was damning. Anderson Construction's decline in performance correlated exactly with my reduced involvement in client-facing activities. Every client who mentioned the change in service quality dated it to the period when my responsibilities had been transferred to Michael and other employees. Armed with this evidence, Ms. Coleman and I prepared a comprehensive filing with the Arizona Registrar of Contractors. The complaint detailed systematic fraud, billing irregularities, code violations, and professional misconduct spanning over a year of Anderson Construction's operations. This is one of the most thorough fraud complaints I've ever prepared, Ms. Coleman told me as we reviewed the final documentation. You've built a case that's going to be very difficult for them to defend against. What happens next? The state opens an investigation. Anderson Construction gets notified that they're under scrutiny. Their business licenses get flagged pending resolution of the investigation. And then we wait to see how they respond. How long does the investigation take? Usually several months, but Alex, I suspect you won't have to wait that long to see results. Companies facing this level of regulatory scrutiny often experience immediate consequences from clients and business partners who don't want to be associated with potential fraud. That evening, I sat in my apartment reviewing everything that had led to this moment. 6 weeks ago, I had been a dismissed employee with no clear future. Now I was about to potentially destroy a company that my own family had built over decades. The moral complexity of the situation wasn't lost on me. These were people I had grown up loving, people who had raised me and shaped my values. But they were also people who had systematically stolen credit for my work, planned to destroy my professional reputation with false accusations, and defrauded clients and contractors for over a year. Sarah found me staring out the window at the Phoenix skyline, lost in thought about the choice I had made. "Are you having second thoughts?" she asked. "Not about the decision, but about what it means. After tomorrow, there's no going back. My relationship with my family will be over permanently." Sarah sat down beside me. "Alex, your relationship with your family ended the day they fired you and started planning to destroy your reputation. You're not ending anything. You're just refusing to let them continue victimizing you and other people." She was right. The people who had raised me wouldn't have engaged in systematic fraud and character assassination. The people who were capable of those things weren't really my family anymore, regardless of our blood relationship. The next morning, Ms. Coleman filed our complaint with the Arizona Registrar of Contractors. Within hours, Anderson Construction would receive notification that they were under investigation for fraud, professional misconduct, and violations of state construction industry regulations. My phone would start ringing before noon. But this time, when my family called, I would be ready for them. The first call came at 11:37 a.m. My father's name flashed on my phone screen, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. But I had been preparing for this conversation for weeks, and I was ready. "Hello, Dad." "Alexandra." His voice was tight with barely controlled fury. "We need to talk, now." "I'm listening." "Not over the phone. Meet me at the office in 1 hour." "I don't think that's a good idea. We can talk right here." There was a pause, and I could hear him breathing heavily. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I've filed a complaint with the state licensing board detailing fraudulent billing practices and professional misconduct. Is there something specific about that complaint that concerns you?" The question was deliberately provocative, and it had the desired effect. My father's composure cracked. Completely. "You vindictive little bitch. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? By destroying the family business with lies and fabrications?" The documentation I provided to the state was factual and verifiable. If Anderson Construction has nothing to hide, the investigation will clear you completely. "Investigation?" His voice rose to a near shout. "Do you understand what happens to a construction company when the state opens a fraud investigation? Clients cancel contracts, suppliers demand cash payments, banks freeze credit lines. You've destroyed us." I felt a pang of something that might have been regret, but it was quickly overwhelmed by anger at his characterization of the situation. "I didn't destroy anything, Dad. I documented practices that Anderson Construction chose to engage in. The consequences of those practices aren't my responsibility. Those allegations are completely false and you know it. Then you'll have no problem providing documentation to disprove them." Another pause. Longer this time. When my father spoke again, his voice had changed. Less angry, more calculating. "What do you want, Alex? Money? A position with the company? We can work something out." The offer was both pathetic and insulting. After everything they had done, after all the credit they had stolen and the reputation they had tried to destroy, they thought they could buy their way out of consequences with the same kind of gesture they should have made 3 years ago. "I don't want anything from Anderson Construction," I said. "I have my own company now." "That little consulting business with Dave Chen?" "Alex, be realistic. You don't have the capital or the connections to compete in this market. But we could find a place for you here. Senior project manager, maybe even associate vice president." The irony was breathtaking. 6 weeks ago, they had fired me as dead weight. Now they were offering me a senior position to make their legal problems disappear. I'm not interested in working for Anderson Construction in any capacity. Then, what is this really about? Revenge? Getting back at us for making hard business decisions? This is about accountability. Your company has been defrauding clients and suppliers for over a year. That's not a hard business decision. That's theft. We've never stolen anything from anyone. You stole credit for my work for 3 years. You've been overcharging clients for materials and services you never provided. You've been blaming subcontractors for cost overruns that were caused by your own poor management. How is that not theft? My father was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his tone was different, resigned almost. You have no idea what you're talking about. Running a construction company isn't like the textbook scenarios you studied in college. Sometimes you have to make adjustments to stay competitive. Adjustments? Dad, you've been billing clients for permit fees that were 3 times what you actually paid. You've been charging for supervisory hours that were never worked. That's not competitive adjustment. That's fraud. Prove it. I already have. That's what the state investigation is going to determine. The conversation ended with my father hanging up without another word. I sat in my apartment afterward, surprised by how calm I felt. For years, confrontations with my family had left me feeling drained and uncertain. This time, I felt clear and confident about my position. My phone rang again 20 minutes later. This time, it was my mother. Alexandra, what have you done? Her voice was different from my father's, less angry, more hurt. I've reported illegal business practices to the appropriate authorities. These are your parents you're talking about, your own family. How could you do this to us? The question stung because it revealed how fundamentally my mother misunderstood the situation. Mom, I didn't do anything to you. I responded to what you did to me. What we did to you. We gave you a job, a place in the family business, an opportunity to learn and grow. You gave me filing duties and coffee runs for 3 years while stealing credit for my actual contributions. Then you fired me and planned to destroy my professional reputation with false accusations. That's not. We never planned to destroy anything. But her protest lacked conviction. We both knew about the public relations campaign Anderson Construction had been preparing. The allegations of stolen trade secrets and corporate espionage that were designed to make me unemployable in the construction industry. Linda Huang told me about the brand protection campaign you hired a PR firm to manage, the one where you were going to publicly accuse me of theft and corporate espionage. My mother was quiet for a long time. We were protecting our business interests by destroying mine with false accusations. The accusations aren't false. You did take client information when you left. I took contact information for clients whose projects I had personally managed. That's not theft. That's maintaining professional relationships I had built through my own work. Work you did as an employee of Anderson Construction. Work that Anderson Construction took credit for while telling me I wasn't contributing anything valuable. The circular logic was maddening. When it served their purposes, my work belonged to Anderson Construction. When they wanted to minimize my contributions, suddenly that same work was worthless. Mom, do you even remember the Tempe Medical Center project? The one where the client was threatening to sue because of communication problems? Of course. I remember. Michael resolved that situation. I resolved that situation. I spent 3 weeks coordinating between your construction teams and their facility management staff. I personally handled every client communication and resolved every technical issue. Michael showed up to one meeting at the end and took credit for the entire crisis management effort. That's not how I remember it. Because that's not how it was recorded in Anderson Construction's internal reports. You rewrote history to make Michael look competent and me look irrelevant. My mother's voice became defensive. Michael has proven himself as a leader. He's earned recognition for his contributions. What contributions? Name one major project where Michael actually resolved a significant problem or built a meaningful client relationship. She couldn't. We both knew she couldn't, because Michael's entire reputation was built on taking credit for other people's work, mostly my work. This conversation isn't productive, my mother said finally. But Alexandra, you need to understand the position. You've put us in. The state investigation will take months to resolve. During that time, Anderson Construction's reputation will be damaged, possibly irreparably. Then you should have thought about that before engaging in practices that warranted investigation. We've never done anything illegal. The state investigation will determine that. After my mother hung up, I felt less calm than I had after talking to my father. His anger had been easier to process than her wounded disappointment. Despite everything that had happened, part of me still wanted my mother's approval, still hoped she might acknowledge that I had been treated unfairly. But that acknowledgement wasn't coming. In her mind, I was the villain in this story, the ungrateful daughter who had turned against her own family out of spite and vindictiveness. The third call came that evening. Michael. Congratulations, sis. You've managed to destroy everything our family built. Hello to you too, Michael. Do you have any idea what the state investigation is going to cost us? Legal fees, auditing expenses, lost contracts? We're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars in expenses, even if we're completely cleared of wrongdoing. Are you expecting to be cleared of wrongdoing? Of course we are. Your allegations are baseless, and you know it. Then the investigation will prove that, and Anderson Construction's reputation will be restored. Alex, cut the bullshit. We both know what this is really about. You're pissed that we made business decisions you didn't like, so you're trying to take us down with you. Michael's directness was almost refreshing after my parents' attempts at emotional manipulation. At least he was acknowledging that this was warfare, rather than pretending it was a misunderstanding. This is about Anderson Construction's fraudulent billing practices and systematic theft of credit for work performed by other people. If you want to characterize that as business decisions I didn't like, that's your choice. What fraudulent billing practices? Give me one specific example. I had been hoping he would ask. The Scottsdale Medical Plaza project. Anderson Construction billed the client $42,000 for permit and inspection fees. The actual costs paid to regulatory agencies totaled $14,000. Where did the other $28,000 go? Michael was quiet for a moment. There are administrative costs associated with permit management, project oversight, coordination with regulatory agencies, compliance documentation. $28,000 in administrative costs for permit management on a 6-month project? That's more than most project managers make in salary for the same period. Complex projects require extensive oversight. Michael, I managed the initial phases of that project. The permit process was straightforward and required minimal oversight. There's no justification for charging the client an additional $28,000. You don't understand the full scope of project management responsibilities. I understand them better than you do, apparently, which is why your projects have been plagued with problems while mine were completed successfully. That hit home. Michael's voice became colder, more personal. You know what, Alex? Maybe Dad was right. Maybe you are dead weight, because someone who was actually valuable to this company wouldn't be trying to destroy it out of spite. Someone who was actually valuable to this company wouldn't have been fired in the first place. You were fired because you weren't contributing anything meaningful. Filing papers and making coffee runs isn't project management. Is that what you think I was doing for 3 years? Filing papers and making coffee runs? That's what you were assigned to do. That's what I was assigned to do while I was actually managing client relationships, resolving technical problems, and coordinating complex project logistics. The same responsibilities you've been given credit for without actually performing. That's complete bullshit. Then explain why Anderson Construction's client satisfaction ratings and project completion records have declined dramatically since my involvement in projects was eliminated. Michael couldn't explain it because the correlation was undeniable. Every metric that mattered in the construction industry had deteriorated after my responsibilities had been transferred to him and other Anderson Construction employees. Whatever problems we've had recently are temporary adjustments as we've expanded operations, he said finally. Temporary adjustments that happen to correlate exactly with my reduced involvement in client-facing activities. Correlation isn't causation. No, but it's suggestive, especially when combined with client testimonials specifically praising my contributions to successful projects. Michael's voice became quiet and dangerous. Alex, I'm going to give you one chance to back down from this. Withdraw your complaint with the state. Publicly acknowledge that your allegations were based on incomplete information, and we'll forget this whole thing happened. And if I don't? Then we go to war, and you won't like how that war ends for you. Is that a threat? It's a promise. You think filing a complaint with the state licensing board is the worst thing you can do to us? You have no idea what we're capable of when we're really motivated. The conversation ended with Michael hanging up abruptly. I sat in my living room afterward, processing the implicit threat he had made. Whatever Anderson Construction was planning in response to my complaint, it was going to be more aggressive than anything they had done so far. I called Dave immediately. They're escalating, I told him, summarizing the conversations with my family members. I was expecting that. Companies facing serious regulatory investigations often respond with increasingly desperate tactics. Michael threatened me directly. He said I wouldn't like how their war against me ends. Dave was quiet for a moment. Alex, I think you should consider hiring personal security for the next few weeks. You think they'd physically threaten me? I think people facing the potential destruction of their business and professional reputation are capable of anything. Better to be overly cautious than caught unprepared. That night I barely slept. Every sound in the building made me jump. Every car that drove past my apartment complex made me wonder if I was being watched. The paranoia was probably excessive, but Michael's threat had been delivered with a certainty that suggested Anderson Construction had specific plans for escalating their campaign against me. The answer came 2 days later, but not in the form I had expected. I was meeting with a potential client, Janet Morrison from Desert Oasis Development, when she asked a question that made my blood run cold. Alexandra, I need to address something. That's come to my attention. I've received some concerning information about your professional background that I'd like you to clarify. My heart sank. What kind of information? Janet pulled out a folder and opened it on the conference table between us. Inside were copies of documents I had never seen before, but that purported to show evidence of professional misconduct during my time at Anderson Construction. These documents suggest that you were terminated from Anderson Construction for cause, specifically for violating client confidentiality agreements and misappropriating proprietary information. I stared at the documents, recognizing them as sophisticated forgeries. They included what appeared to be internal memos documenting my alleged misconduct, client complaints about my behavior, and even a supposed confession letter where I admitted to stealing trade secrets. These documents are completely fabricated, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I was never terminated for cause, and I never violated any confidentiality agreements. The person who provided these documents seemed very credible. They claimed to be a former Anderson Construction employee who was troubled by your attempts to start a competing business based on stolen information. Who provided these documents? Someone named Michael Rodriguez. He said he was Anderson Construction's business development director. The pieces fell into place immediately. Michael Rodriguez was the corporate espionage specialist that Anderson Construction had hired to undermine Chen Martinez Construction. Now, he was manufacturing evidence to support false accusations against me. Ms. Morrison, I can provide you with documentation proving that those allegations are false. Client testimonials, project records, even the termination paperwork from Anderson Construction showing that I was laid off for budgetary reasons, not terminated for cause. Janet looked uncomfortable. I'd like to believe you, Alexandra, but these documents are very detailed and specific. If there's any possibility that you've engaged in unethical business practices, I can't risk associating my company with yours. I left the meeting knowing that my professional reputation was under systematic attack. Michael Rodriguez was contacting potential clients with fabricated evidence designed to make me unemployable in the construction industry. Dave was waiting for me at our secure meeting location when I arrived an hour later. One look at my face told him everything he needed to know. How bad? He asked. I told him about the forged documents and Michael Rodriguez's campaign to destroy my credibility with potential clients. Dave listened with growing anger, occasionally asking clarifying questions but mostly just absorbing the implications of what we were facing. This is criminal, he said when I finished. Manufacturing false documents to damage someone's reputation is fraud, defamation, and probably several other felonies. Can we prove the documents are forged? Maybe. But even if we can, the damage to your reputation might be irreversible. Construction is a relationship-based industry. If potential clients think there's even a possibility that you've engaged in unethical practices, they'll choose someone else rather than take the risk. The hopelessness of the situation was overwhelming. Anderson Construction had resources, connections, and a willingness to engage in criminal behavior to destroy me. I had truth and integrity, but those seemed like weak weapons against forged documents and systematic character assassination. There is one option, Dave said slowly, but you're not going to like it. What? We accelerate everything. Instead of waiting for the state investigation to run its course, we go public immediately with everything we know about Anderson Construction's fraudulent practices. How do we do that? Media exposure. I have contacts at several industry publications and local news stations. If we can get them interested in the story, Anderson Construction will be forced to respond to public scrutiny instead of conducting their campaign against you in private. Dave was right that I wouldn't like the option. Going public meant exposing my family's criminal behavior to media scrutiny, potentially destroying not just their business, but their personal reputations as well. Dave, these are still my parents, and my brother we're talking about. I know. But Alex, they've made it clear that they're willing to destroy you completely to protect themselves. At what point do you stop treating them like family and start treating them like the criminals they've become? That evening, I made the decision that would define the rest of my relationship with my family. I called Dave and told him to contact his media connections. Set up the interviews, I said. All of them. It's time to tell the truth publicly. The Phoenix Business Journal was the first to bite. Reporter Amanda Chen had been covering construction industry issues for 5 years and was immediately interested in a story about systematic fraud and family betrayal in one of the city's most established construction companies. This is a significant story, she told Dave and me during our initial meeting. If your allegations are accurate, this could be one of the biggest construction industry scandals in Arizona history. I provided Amanda with copies of all the documentation I had gathered: billing irregularities, client testimonials, project records showing stolen credit, and evidence of the forged documents that Michael Rodriguez had been distributing to potential clients. I'll need to verify all of this independently, Amanda said. But if it checks out, I can have the story ready for publication within a week. What about Anderson Construction's response? I'll contact them for comment before publication. Standard journalistic practice. But based on what you've shown, I don't think their response is going to be particularly persuasive. 3 days later, Amanda called with an update that changed everything. Alexandra, I've been trying to reach Anderson Construction for comment on your allegations, but I'm getting some very interesting responses. What kind of responses? Panic. Robert Anderson hung up on me twice. Linda Anderson told me no comment and immediately ended the call. Michael Anderson accused me of participating in a conspiracy against his family. What about the business? Development Director, Michael Rodriguez. That's the most interesting part. According to the Arizona Secretary of State's Business Registration Database, there is no Michael Rodriguez listed as an employee or officer of Anderson Construction. The person who's been contacting your potential clients may not actually work for your family's company. The revelation was stunning. Michael Rodriguez, the corporate espionage specialist who had been systematically undermining Chen Martinez Construction, wasn't even an Anderson Construction employee. He was an independent contractor hired specifically to destroy my reputation and business prospects. Amanda, that means Anderson Construction hired someone to impersonate their employee while distributing forged documents about me to potential clients. That's exactly what it means, and it's going to be very difficult for them to explain when the story runs. The Phoenix Business Journal article published on a Thursday morning with the headline, Family Construction Company Accused of Systematic Fraud and Corporate Espionage. The story detailed Anderson Construction's fraudulent billing practices, the theft of credit for my work, and the campaign of character assassination that had followed my departure from the company. The response was immediate and devastating. By noon, 3 major clients had canceled contracts with Anderson Construction pending resolution of the fraud allegations. 2 suppliers had demanded immediate payment of outstanding invoices, citing concerns about the company's financial stability. The Arizona Registrar of Contractors had announced that Anderson Construction's license was under immediate review. But the most significant development came from an unexpected source. Dr. Maria Santos from Tempe Medical Center called me directly. Alexandra, I just read the article in the Phoenix Business Journal. I want you to know that Tempe Medical Center is prepared to provide whatever testimony or documentation you need to support your allegations against Anderson Construction. I appreciate that, Dr. Santos, but I don't want to put you in an awkward position. You're not putting me in any position. Anderson Construction put themselves in this position when they decided to engage in fraudulent practices. We've been documenting problems with their recent work for months, and we're prepared to make that documentation public. Over the next week, I received similar calls from 4 other Anderson Construction clients who had experienced problems with recent projects. Each one offered to provide testimony supporting the allegations detailed in the Phoenix Business Journal article. The pattern was consistent and damning. Every client who had worked with Anderson Construction since my departure reported problems that they hadn't experienced during projects where I had been involved. Poor communication, missed deadlines, cost overruns, and billing irregularities. That hadn't been apparent until the Phoenix Business Journal story prompted them to review their contracts more carefully. Anderson Construction's response to the media coverage was predictably defensive and increasingly desperate. My father issued a statement calling the allegations baseless attacks by a disgruntled former employee, but provided no documentation to refute the specific claims made in the article. Michael held a press conference where he accused me of orchestrating a coordinated campaign of lies and fabrications designed to destroy Anderson Construction out of personal spite. But when reporters asked specific questions about the billing irregularities and forged documents, he became evasive and ended the press conference abruptly. My mother took a different approach, reaching out to local media with emotional appeals about family loyalty and the pain of having a daughter turn against her own parents. But her interviews backfired when reporters asked why Anderson Construction had hired an independent contractor to distribute forged documents about me to potential clients. The final blow came 2 weeks after the Phoenix Business Journal article, when the Arizona Registrar of Contractors announced the results of their investigation. Anderson Construction's license was suspended pending resolution of multiple fraud complaints. Robert Anderson and Michael Anderson were personally barred from working on any construction projects in Arizona until further notice. Dave found me in our office that evening, staring out the window at the Phoenix skyline and processing the magnitude of what had happened. "How do you feel?" he asked, exhausted, relieved, guilty, vindicated, all at the same time. "Any regrets?" I thought, about the question seriously. 3 months ago, I had been part of a family business, however dysfunctional that relationship had been. Now, my parents and brother were facing potential criminal charges, their company was destroyed, and our personal relationship was irreparably shattered. "I regret that it had to come to this," I said finally. "But I don't regret exposing the truth about their business practices." And what about Chen Martinez Construction? That was the silver lining in all of this. During the weeks that Anderson Construction had been imploding, Chen Martinez Construction had been thriving. The clients who had been approached with forged documents about my professional misconduct had seen the Phoenix Business Journal article and realized they had been targeted by a systematic disinformation campaign. Instead of damaging my reputation, Anderson Construction's desperate tactics had actually enhanced my credibility. Potential clients were impressed by my willingness to expose fraud, even when it involved my own family. Current clients appreciated working with someone who prioritized ethical practices over family loyalty. "We've got more work than we can handle," I told Dave, "and a reputation for integrity that money can't buy." 6 months later, Chen Martinez Construction was one of the fastest-growing construction firms in Arizona. We had completed our first major commercial project ahead of schedule and under budget. Our client satisfaction ratings were the highest in the industry. We had a waiting list of projects that would keep us busy for the next 2 years. Anderson Construction, by contrast, had filed for bankruptcy protection. The civil lawsuits from defrauded clients had overwhelmed their insurance coverage. The criminal investigation into their business practices was ongoing, with indictments expected within the next few months. I hadn't spoken to any of my family members since the Phoenix Business Journal article was published. There had been no apologies, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no recognition that their actions had made this outcome inevitable. But I had learned something important about myself during this process. I was stronger than I had ever realized. Strong enough to stand up to people I loved when they were wrong. Strong enough to expose the truth even when that truth was painful and complicated. Strong enough to build something meaningful from the ashes of everything I had thought my future would be. On a warm evening in late fall, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, looking out at the lights of Phoenix spreading across the desert valley. The city looked different now, not like a barrier to overcome, but like a foundation to build on. My phone buzzed with a text from a client. "Thank you for everything you've done on this project. Working with Chen Martinez Construction has been the best construction experience we've ever had." I smiled and put the phone away. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new projects, new opportunities to prove that integrity and competence were more valuable than family connections or political manipulation. I had started this journey as someone who thought she needed approval from people who had already decided she wasn't worth their investment. I was ending it as someone who knew her own value and didn't need anyone else's permission to succeed. The girl who had been dismissed as dead weight was gone. In her place was a woman who had built something meaningful, something lasting, something that reflected her own values instead of someone else's limitations. And for the first time in my adult life, that was enough. Up next, you've got 2 more. Standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.